Alright, hello everyone. This is going to be our first lesson. Um, Today we're actually going to discuss the various primitive types that are found within the C# language. You'll find the majority of these types in all high-level languages that you can use. That means Python, VB.NET, anything really, Java. And the really nice thing about this is if you learn it in C#, you're going to learn it everywhere, which is super awesome. It doesn't matter what type of job you get, as long as it's programming in general in a high-level language. These concepts are transferable, which means that you learn it here, it's going to apply everywhere. Um, we're also going to be learning today about variables, which go hand in hand with types. Okay. If you'd like to follow along with me, we're not actually going to realistically be building anything, but we're just going to open up a coding prompt. I would like for you to go to New Project and just select a console application. Right, they're pretty much the simplest. You don't even need to worry about the name or the solution name, any of that. Just click on OK. Okay. So as you can see here, it's going to pull up a class. We'll get in the classes much later. We'll get in the namespaces much later as well, and we'll also get in the functions much later. Much later. So within the curly braces here, I'm just going to show you what I mean by types and what I mean by variables. Okay, so the first type that we're going to be discussing here is a char. Actually, before I get into this, I do want to explain why types and variables are important. All right, so a good bit of our day, every day as programmers, is spent creating, modifying, deleting values from our applications. Right, even applications that are as big as Google, Facebook, all of them have to do behind the scenes with creating values, modifying existing values, and deleting old values. I mean, that's ultimately what our business is. Whenever you narrow it down, I mean, things get extraordinarily complex. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's easy, but fundamentally, it's a pretty safe assumption to say that. For example, whenever you log into Facebook, you have an existing account there. You send your username, which is your email, and your password to the application. All right. So behind the scenes, the application takes that information that you entered from the web page and compares it to what they have internally in their records, okay, in their database. A convenient way to shuttle that information from that text box into the database is where types and variables and a lot of the back end programming comes into play here. I know many of you are familiar with what I mean by back end, but if that's not clear to you, don't worry, we will get into that. So the first type that I want to discuss here is a char, okay, and that's short for character. I'm just going to call it a character moving forward, okay. So in C#, the way that you declare a variable is you must begin with what type of variable you want. And there will be exceptions to that later in the role. I'm sorry, later down the road, but I'll get into that then. So just for now, get in the habit of doing it this way. So if I want to create a character variable, let's say first name initial. Say I want to keep track of my initial of my first name. The first thing that I have to do is I have to define what type this variable name is going to be, and then the equal sign says I want to set its value. Okay. So this essentially, I just created my first variable, first name initial. Okay, and its value is C for Craig. That's me. Don't forget it, guys. Um, Characters, actually, believe it or not, they're not used that often in programming, believe it or not. You use them sometimes whenever you're interfacing with strings, which we're going to get into next. But for the most part, Unicode characters are not really used that often. Speaking of which, I just said a very important word. Okay, so a character is actually the type is for Unicode characters, and that's very important whenever it comes to different languages, different symbols that you can find in computers, all those things. Don't worry about that for now. The best way that you can remember what a character is just remember it as an alphanumeric character that could also be a symbol. Okay. So moving forward here, the next type I want to get into is a string, okay? And a string can be anything. It can be as long or as short as you want it to be. It could be even longer. Okay. Um, so these are, once again, I'm declaring the type of variable that I would like for first name as string. Okay, and we're going to get into this is very bare bones. I cannot stress this enough, but it's very important that you understand this syntax right here, because whenever it gets into manipulating these things, like here, this is what I mean. Okay. Um, this is where your application starts to change how variables are, and that's why declaring this is important. We'll get into if statements later on, but I do want to explain this is why variables are important, because you can do conditional statements, which drive the logic of how you do business, and these conditional statements can it starts out like really simple, but you get extremely complex with how you change some of your code and some of your classes and stuff like that. But forget about this. I just wanted to show why you use variables. But the important thing is once again, these top four rows, learning what a type is, what a variable is, and how to assign a value to a variable. Those are all super important. All right, and I promise you, if you can already understand this concept, you are well on your way to becoming an awesome programmer. Okay, um, the next type that we're going to discuss is an integer. Okay, so an integer, or an int for short, is a type that represents a number-based value. Okay, a good example following this paradigm of personal information is age. Okay, say I need a variable to store someone's age that's using our application. That is a great use for int. Ints can be positive or negative, but they cannot contain decimals, which leads me to our next value. Double is, there's also a decimal, but forget about decimal. Double is what generally programmers use to keep track of decimal base values. These can also be positive or negative. Let's say a good bit of personal information that I could have here is my blood alcohol content. Maybe I've been drinking on the job today. Um, this is generally what the syntax that you would use to create the type of double with a variable BAC, blood alcohol content, and then assigning its value here. Okay. Um, the last type of primitive type that we're actually going to be working with here, believe it or not, we're almost done already with our learning, is a Boolean, okay? And it's bull for short, okay? Um, okay, so Booleans can either be true or false, okay? There's no middle ground, all right? And a great example following this paradigm again is alive. Is Craig alive? I hope so. Either that or, I'm just a zombie here giving this presentation. Um, so obviously, too, I just want to show you the opposite value of true, false. Okay, it's just true or false. In some programming languages, you'll see 1 or 0. 1 represents true, 0 represents false. But just try to get familiar with what's in C# first. And once you become familiar enough with one language, and this is the recommended way of doing things start making sense in other languages. Okay, just try to be proficient in one. And actually, believe it or not, this concludes our lesson for today. Types are very important whenever it comes to understanding objects, which we're going to be leading into next here. It's very important, but this is kind of like a two-part lesson. If you understand types and variables, you're going to understand objects next, and objects are these two things are really what's going to help us create our applications. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please hit me up in River, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Have a good day.